All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first Great Data Debate of 2023. And in the most unbiased take possible, I'm putting it out there that this is going to be one of the best sessions of the year. I'm Austin Cruns, the Director of Data Strategy here at Atlan, and I have one of the easiest jobs today as the moderator of this debate because I'm asking the people who literally shape the data and analytics world about the data and analytics world. It doesn't get much easier than that, right? Now, as with all Atlan events, hopefully you've attended before, you know we like to keep the audience involved. So while I introduce our first panel, take some time to scan this QR code or follow the link that will be in the chat and let us know, what do you think the biggest buzzword in 2023 will be? I'm sure we'll have answers flooding in and keep them coming because after we do some intros, we're going to take a look at this and see what the word cloud has been able to generate while we get going. Already see some things coming in. It's awesome. We'll come right back to this. Super excited to get started. We have not one, but two awesome panels. So we'll have a brief break in between to set up for part two and introduce our second panel, and then we're right back into things. Our first panel of the day probably needs no introductions, but I will do my best. First, we have investor, advisor, entrepreneur, and led a company that I think you might have heard of in the modern data stack. Please welcome former Snowflake CEO, Bob Muglia. Claps in the chat too. We'll do that. Next, if you're doing any work in the modern data stack, these three lowercase letters have probably become your best friend. And so we are thrilled to have the co-founder and CEO of DBT Labs, Tristan Handy. Claps in the chat. Welcome, Tristan. Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, you are probably already subscribed to her Metadata weekly blog. You might be one of her tens of thousands of LinkedIn followers. Maybe you've seen her TED Talk. And I'm not just saying these things because she's my boss. For all things active metadata, please welcome co-founder of Atlan, Prukalpa. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Before we get going, let's just jump back to this word cloud and see what we have, because I think it ties in nicely with a fun little exercise. And unsurprisingly, seeing a lot of AI, chat GPT, data mesh, data contracts. This is awesome. We're definitely going to be taking a screenshot of this and sending it out after. All great topics. But maybe let's get back into, as I like to call it, the Brady Bunch mode. I'll stop sharing so you can see all of our smiling faces. Welcome, everyone. Thanks again for taking time to join. Much like any debate class, if you've ever taken one, there's some icebreaker exercises. And so we've got a lot of buzzwords from the audience. We've prepared some ourselves. The first exercise is just rapid fire. All right. You won't have a chance to explain yourself yet, but I'm going to list a term or a topic, and you have to give either the thumbs up or the thumbs down, letting the audience know, are we going to be talking about that term in 2025? Is it still going to be around? Sound fair? All right, let's do it. So the first term, almost guaranteed to see every day that you log into LinkedIn in 2022, thumbs up or thumbs down for data mesh. You can go around the room or just give us a signal. Oh, Bob, there's no fence sitting here. We got thumbs up. We got thumbs up from Tristan and Prukalpa. Are you going to break the tie there?
I think I wouldn't say thumbs down, but we'll keep talking about it, but I don't think it'll be what we're focused on.
Also, I have a clarification question. So is it like the concept exists or the exact term exists? What are we?
You're being so precise, Prukalpa.
I feel like there's room for interpretation in this exercise, and then I want to hear what you think will be around and what won't, maybe a little bit later on. So we're going thumbs up right now, and now Prukalpa has to tell us if she thinks semantically it'll be around or or the technology or concepts behind it. All right. So we'll move on to the next one. Next rapid fire question. Will this term be around in 2025? Data contracts. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Ooh, quite the flip in the second one. Okay. 2 thumbs down, 1 thumbs up. Last one for the rapid fire, break the ice exercise. We saw it in the word cloud right there. Generative AI. We got thumbs up across the board. Okay. Yeah, I think the Chat GPT posts on LinkedIn were more popular than the Spotify Wrapped on social media this past year. So that makes sense. Cool. Well, let's maybe jump right in. I'll give you a chance to explain some of these answers so it's not just held to a thumbs up and thumbs down, because I know nothing is that black and white in our world. So let's just get right into the generative AI. There's a lot of buzz around it. GPT, Chat GPT, GPT-3. We're already hearing about GPT-4. Touted as, this next fundamental shift, bigger than mobile, or, I've seen Google is maybe fearing that, Chat GPT is around. What does this mean for the data stack as we know it today? How does this change the role of even data practitioners? I'm seeing a lot of code being generated. What changes if we fast forward 5 years? Bob, we can, start with you.
Sure.
And then we'll go around the room.
I think it changes everything. I mean, I think it's the biggest change I've seen in my lifetime. I'll say that, and I'm older than most people, certainly in this panel. I never predicted that we would have systems that could understand English and respond to written language the way we've seen progress in neural networks and deep learning and these generative AI systems. I also think the other term that I think is going to be big is artificial general intelligence and the move towards that. I think it's going to affect everything. I think the modern data stack is a critical part of where we start. I think the techniques we use. I mean, I said to data mesh because I think we'll be doing data mesh in the concept that the organizational structures that are there. The domain concepts have been around for 20 years. They're great concepts. Whether we continue to use that term or not, I don't know, but the ideas are great. I think data contracts are interesting in the sense that it's really about models. I'm not sure we'll use the word contracts. I think we'll start to use the word models a lot more. But yes, generative AI, English and the ability to translate between languages, it affects everything. And things that are possible now that literally I didn't know how to do a year ago. And we can fund them.
I worked.
Okay.
But back in undergrad, I worked for the University of Maryland Board of Regents, and I helped curate data about the 13 University of Maryland system schools and like make it available to this Board of Regents for whatever. And my boss at the time was like, and this was all in like Microsoft Access. It was like very high tech. And my boss at the time was like, it's great that you've like built this system that has like drop downs and stuff like that, but can't you just like let the people like type in a question and like hit enter? And I was just like, I know I'm only like a college junior, but I'm pretty sure that's not possible. Like just like not at all possible today. And I kind of thought that that's like, I would go through my entire, whatever, 30-year career or something, and it would continue to not be possible. And so like Bob was saying, like I would not have introduced the concept of AGI into this conversation, because I think that's a great way to like head straight off the freeway into the ditch. I have my own thoughts there, but I think that some of the use cases in the modern data stack for ChatGPT, you don't actually have to have a model that truly understands like the symbolic representation of like what it's talking about. It can actually just provide utility anyway. Like the thing I'm really excited about is, I think at least for like some period of time, I think humans are going to continue to build business representations, DBT models. And once you build that kind of vocabulary in your system, I think it's going to be very possible to like self-serve on the last mile of analytics with a ChatGPT style interface. I think we've been needing that for such a long time.
Yeah, I think that to me is the clearest part of the puzzle today, like, which is like, I think the final layer of like the democratization as buzzword of data or analytics. Like, I think that it's very clear what the role of AI will do there, and like what, and I think that final last mile can get addressed there. What isn't as clear to me is what will the role of AI be in actually changing the lives of data practitioners. And I think one thing is like there's likely going to be a GitHub Copilot version for every kind of practice, right? Like, so there's definitely going to be like some layer of that for like a data engineer and an analyst. And like, I think how does the life of a data practitioner change through some of this? I think that part of the puzzle is what isn't as clear to me.
When do we get, hey, Tristan, when do we see a Copilot for DBT?
So, well, we're not, like, we ourselves are not working on anything like that, but I think that and maybe this is the skeptic in me, and maybe that's actually, you know, time after time after time, this point of view gets defeated in the open market of ideas. But I think there will be a lot of relevance to a Copilot style interface to write the first 80% of a DBT model. I think that the last 20% is going to be increasingly challenging. And I think that's what we've seen with AI's tackling of a lot of like real world problems. The first bit is like very tractable at this point, and self-driving cars. Like, well, it turns out the last 1% actually matters like a lot. So I think that there will, in not too long, probably be an interface where you can get a long way, but then you'll need a human to actually like make sure that it's correct.
I mean, I think the human in the loop is a really critical element of these systems, these generative AI systems, and we're discovering that human-aided training is critical to get the kind of results that we need. I think it's a participation, but I'm super bullish. I mean, I'm very bullish on where this is going to go. Maybe overly bullish, I admit. I've really drunk the Kool-Aid. But I do think it is a massive change, and we can now begin to model things, and these systems can help us model the semantics of data and ultimately of business, which were so difficult to achieve before because they can work with so much information and help assist that process. I think it's critical to, you know, what you're trying to do, Tristan, in terms of building the semantic model on top of DBT in the modern data stack.
I think, Prukalpa, I know that we're talking about semantic understandings, and it strikes me that the thing that you folks are spending all your time building is one particular interface, or at least the kind of initial manifestation of it is one particular interface to like semantic concepts behind data. I have to imagine that the idea of a catalog becomes different when it doesn't have to be kind of a static, like, here's this noun. It's like, I can understand how all of these things are integrated together.
Yeah. So we ran some experiments on like, so we actually launched this like beta thing called Trident AI powered through GPT-3. And it's basically like auto documents your data, and it auto creates like business meaning on top of your metrics and like, you know, things like that. And we were surprised, like it was an experiment. We were surprised by the quality of results that we're getting. And so I think there are like, I think what metadata, like what does, I think everything changes. In the governance world, I think everything changes, right? Like I think all the things that were really complicated to do because of which you couldn't get the value that you needed downstream, like suddenly changes. And I think I think that can actually be transformative in actually getting, like, you know, we think about this a lot, is like, how do you actually activate metadata and get value from it rather than spend all your time creating it? I think a lot of that, there's a ton of value that can get generated.
Yeah, and these systems will start to act on the metadata too, right? And they'll help us to make sure our systems stay in sync.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, you know, one of the major challenges we have is that users have is understanding what's in the data systems that they have, maintaining and controlling them. All of the different tools and catalogs and things we have today are very early. They don't fit together quite as well as they need to. I think this is a key technology that will help enable it. And then again, I continue to believe that we'll see database innovation as well. to help us work with the complex relationships required, the graph-oriented relationships that you really can't handle in SQL today. And I think that's critical as we start to work with metadata, and as you say, to activate metadata. But these machine learning systems are a huge part of that activation. I mean, they will be doing a lot of that activation and driving a lot of that as essentially data applications responding to data, metadata in this case.
I think it's really just super quick. I think that what data has needed for a very long time is the ability to push the value that we all know is present in all of the systems that we work on into the hands of humans who are actually able to act on it, or push it into systems of record who like can take action without a human intervention. And so for anybody who is involved in building systems like this, I think seeing greater path to value is tremendously generative for all of us. I think it's a boon to the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. I was going to say, speaking of value, I think a lot of this accelerates where we're going, and then there's sort of what is the human in the loop element that needs to be the checks and balances of where this ends and where we can pick up and kind of add value or compounded value between humans plus these AI systems. A piece of that promise, I think, is related to another term that we were talking about, which is data mesh, right? And it's something that probably been around 2017, 2018, but seems like 2022 really started to catch fire, and maybe starting to realize value from concepts like data mesh. I mean, a lot of it is just fundamentally what we wish we could have done a long time ago, I think, right? So how much of data mesh is just this natural ebb and flow of innovations of the individual pieces, and how much of it is net new, some new paradigm that's never been thought of, right? I think a lot of it is kind of a mixture. So just curious, is data mesh this cool concept? Prukalpa, you had mentioned, are we talking about the word or, the underlying principles? So I'd, love to get your take on, where does data mesh go from here over the next few years?
Kick us off. I asked because I actually had I don't fully know about whether the word data mesh will continue as it is, and it's a very complex, I don't know if anyone here has read the textbook. I actually have read the textbook, and it took me a while. I was literally underlining some of the words in the text, which I don't think I've ever done since undergrad. But I think there are some concepts in the data mesh which make a ton of sense, right? I think the concept of data as a product, which is data should be reusable and reproducible, make a ton of sense. And I think today we actually have technology that can enable that in a way that just wasn't possible before. In DBT, you can actually define your YAML, and you can actually ship data as a product in a way that you just couldn't do before, right? Or now with Fivetran, opening up their metadata API, you actually have an ability to take this concept of reusability and quality checks, and you can bring that back to source, or you can shift governance to the left, right? So I think there are these concepts in the data mesh which are federated computational governance and data as a product and things like that. And I think those concepts make a ton of sense. The technology is there today to make it happen. There's a lot of work we need to do on the people process side to actually make it real. And I think that I've rarely seen real implementations of the mesh yet in practice.
I mean, that's why I agree with you, everything you just said there. I see data mesh really as an organizational concept. This idea of domains, treating data as a product. For larger organizations, that's exactly right. I mean, it's exactly the way you have to treat things to scale. All organizations should treat data as a product. Obviously, if you're a 100-person company, you've got 3 people in your data group, you're not going to have a complicated data mesh. The one team is going to support the organization, but they'll be working with data coming from a wide variety of third-party organizations. And in that way, it is meshed together because they're all products. Now, sometimes in data mesh, they talk about specific mechanisms for doing this, technical approaches. I care less about that. To me, there are many ways to achieve that concept of data as a product, domain or ownership of data. I prefer thinking about it in the context of the modern data stack. That's what we designed at Snowflake. That's what data sharing was all about, was essentially to create a data mesh, was a mechanism inside Snowflake in the modern data stack that allows for information to be data to be treated as a product and shared. Now, there's still missing pieces to that, which is really the metadata descriptions that are associated with it. As you say, DBT and the YAML descriptions, that's just the start of where we want to go in terms of our metadata, in terms of our metadata, our understanding of metadata. But the concepts, the organizational concepts are very strong. That's why I said, I don't know if the term is going to be used.
I think both of you, I really agree that this is mostly a statement about organizational design, and great. The one point I want to make that's maybe a little bit contrarian is that I'm not totally sure that we have all the technology that we need to do a good job of this today. And I'm not suggesting that there's some big it's not like, oh, we're missing this big giant thing. It's more that I think that we're still in the phase of data in the modern data stack where we're generally building pretty monolithic technology infrastructures. And that's not about, at least from my perspective, that's not about centralizing your data versus not centralizing your data. It's more about how do you write your code? How do you architect your applications? And you can actually see this going on inside of DBT when you look at our anonymized data of the entire DBT install base. You see that the number of models in a single DBT project over the years has just gone up and up and up and up. And at this point, there's some kind of unreasonable percentage of DBT models that are over projects that are over 5,000 distinct DBT models. And that's a really big project. It reminds me of the early days of big internet companies where everybody decided that these monolithic software applications were just not going to continue to scale. And people are pushed in DBT's case, at least, were pushed to do this partially because of the way that the product works. And there are some fundamental programming constructs that we need to introduce into DBT in order to actually enable a more microservices type architecture. And we're very focused on doing it. It's one of the things that I'm honestly most interested in. I think that people should be able to use DBT, separate DBT microservices in their distributed ownership of data domains. I see both of you smiling at me. What am I saying that I'm missing?
Are you going to address DBT sprawl? Is that what you say? You're telling me that's all, Tristan? Is that you guys created this problem and you're going to solve it now? Is that what I heard?
So I think that this is an inevitable process that new things go through. You and I were talking the other day about how there was this sprawl of Windows desktops early in the PC era.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
Many of them were infected with malware, and you had to kind of get ownership over this problem. And this happened in VMware. I was talking to some folks there. There was tons of VMs, and no one knew what they were doing. And this we released a thing into the universe, and it was widely adopted. And now we're trying to figure out how do we push development practices that will actually make usage of this technology at scale really possible.
So I see that pendulum happen all the time, right? We want to get faster and faster and faster, and then we kind of reel it in. Do you think as we get deeper into this modern data stack that those back and forth become more narrow and narrow to the point where we don't even notice it's a new problem? It's just kind of solved quicker. Or is it always going to be this back and forth? Do we have to get over a certain point to then realize what the next need is?
Usually, in my experience, and usually you hear from customers, they tell you pretty clearly when you've caused a problem for them, or when they think you can help fix a problem for you. But that's one of the great things, is that the technology is available now to solve so many problems that we couldn't solve before. You know, we've got the data in one place, you know, whether it's a data lake or whether it's a data warehouse or however it's structured, those problems I think are getting sorted out. We're putting the data together. We're learning how to manage it. We're starting to collect more and more information, metadata on that. And as Prukalpa said, we're working to figure out how to activate that metadata. I mean, this is this whole concept that Gartner talked about with the data fabric, you know, which is generally correct. This idea that we're going to think about data much more broadly. It's a product. It is a huge part of what organizations are producing. It's a major asset that needs to be managed. I think that's becoming more and more true, and especially with the things you can do with generative models and machine learning and deep learning, all of these things today, it really opens up possibilities. But we're in a good place to begin with. We just have a lot of work to do.
Prukalpa, did you have anything? I wasn't sure.
I'll drink to that. No.
Awesome.
I find it exciting seeing all this stuff. I find it very exciting seeing the different work that's happening across the industry. I mean, I really love to see the you know, the work that Prukalpa and Bar and all of the other teams, Tristan, all the other teams are doing that are innovating in pieces of the modern data stack. What I do want to see is these things fitting together a little better than they're fitting together today. And again, I think that's a weakness of the current modern data stack platform, in that the database semantics don't support everything you need to do with metadata. And I think that will change in the next 3 to 5 years. You know, this is the relational knowledge graphs and that whole direction that I think will be added on top of what we're doing. It's on top of what we're doing with SQL and the modern data stack, and certainly on top of what, and very much side by side with what's happening in machine learning and generative AI.
So I think it maybe ties nicely into a question that I had, which is what technologies don't exist yet that maybe should? You know, Tristan, you kind of hinted at there's, you know, maybe not giant pieces of this that's missing, but something there can help us get from point A to point B or get to the next step. So, you know, what might fade away in 2023? What technologies do we need in 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, you were very kind to let me know that you were going to hit me with this, because so that I didn't get caught totally flat-footed. I actually wrote a couple of notes. Okay, so and these are all like capabilities, and it's not clear to me that they're products. It's not even clear to me specifically like where they would put capabilities that we don't have. Okay, one, I think that we've proven that blob storage is a great backend for data. And Snowflake and BigQuery and Databricks all have these engines that like read data kind of locally from blob storage. But why can't we access data, common data set across multiple of these platforms more easily? And we have the like file formats and table formats that will allow us to do this. But I think that right now it's still too hard to integrate your deployments of multiple of these technologies together. Okay. I think that there needs to be more analytics on top of data pipelines, data about costs, data about execution time, about SLAs, like data. I think that needs to become a pretty big thing. I think that data professionals need PagerDuty. I think both like culturally and technically, we need to actually figure out how to support these things that we were saying, our production infrastructure. I think that we need to be able to cross-compile SQL. I think you need to be able to like express your business logic once, and it needs to be able to be executed on multiple different platforms. I think I'm still waiting for streaming SQL data pipelines. Like there's product movement in this space, but it hasn't like hit mainstream. Last one, I think there should be integrated development environment awareness across every layer of the modern data stack. So right now, you kind of, dbt gives you the ability to have multiple different environments, but that doesn't always push to other products in the space. That's my list.
It's a good list. It's a good list. And on top of that, I would say the biggest thing is this platform, this database platform that handles the semantics that we need to work with metadata. And I think that is the core missing piece that would allow for interoperability between these different systems. I've always found the database is always the center of all applications. And by having a shared common database, it allows different systems to work together. And certainly that's what we're seeing with the modern data stack and with the different SQL platforms, be it Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift or whatever it is, Synapse, Databricks. but now thinking about what we can build on top of that with metadata, we don't have that right now. So that'd be my big miss.
And I think you asked a little bit about what will start to fade away. I don't think we'll see a lot of fading away. I think we'll see more consolidation in parts of the stack in 2023 and 2024. Like the stack itself needs like something to manage right now. And I think we'll start seeing naturally
Right.
more and more consolidation in the stack.
It's always the case, right? As things mature, we see consolidation in it. Again, I don't think we've reached that point of maturity where we'll fully see the consolidation, but I think that is coming, as you point out.
I think there's still a lot of opportunity to blending the cloud and the on-prem world. Definitely something in 2023, right? There's so much opportunity in the modern data stack to incorporate these legacy architectures and kind of move them still. I kind of touch on new technologies and what's going well in the modern data stack. There's so much great innovation happening. How do we make sure this time next year or 2 to 5 years from now, like how does it all not crash and burn, right? How do we avoid making the same mistakes so we're not repeating the same things that we need now 2 years from now? I'm always kind of curious, seeing things come and go, like I said. So what would make that happen? How do we avoid it? How do we learn from maybe history and go from there?
Well, I think Tristan needs to clean up that DBT sprawl that he's created. That's probably the first thing on the list that we could do here.
He's not letting you get away from that.
I think that data professionals who've been around for a couple of decades have kind of PTSD, because it always seems like there's like some wave of technology that is going to have some level of staying power. And then it turns out it was actually Nokia flip phones and not the iPhone. But there are like certain things that if we've now had iPhones for 15 years, and yeah, let's change it to the iPhone. It's advanced, but like the fundamental UI paradigm, like it's pretty consistent. And I don't know, like, do you think we're still gonna are we all going to die with iPhones in our pockets? Like, I'm sure we'll have moved on at some point, but like the model is pretty resilient. There's going in order for the modern data stack to not work, it's not going to be displaced by something that is more scalable. Like the idea of the modern data stack is that you have cloud infrastructure that you bring your data to that, you leave your data there, and it like the compute happens there, and it scales forever. And until you have some like very significant change in paradigm, which I don't know exactly where that's going to come from, then we're gonna keep doing what we're doing here. There's going to be evolution, but not revolution without some massive change.
I tend to agree. I think the modern data stack is here to stay. It will continue to improve. It's far from perfect. It has missing elements, but I don't think it's gonna. I think that the idea is going to be around for a very long time. Eventually, we may work with something other than SQL to actually work with data, but I think it's when that evolves, 10, 15 years from now, that will move forward from this. But I think this architecture is going to be present really for a generation of IT, a full generation or more of IT, which is 15, 20 years. I mean, once things get stuck in IT, they tend to stick around for a really long time. I mean, that's one of the Hadoop. I would say Hadoop never made it over that crest, right? Some companies were able to successfully use it, but it was not able to be applied broadly across the industry the way the modern data stack has. And I think it's like applications. It's like two-tier applications. They don't go away quickly.
And Bob, it's like when you move on past that IT cycle, it's typically not that those things all get ripped out and there's something new that's in there. It's like you get built on top of. Now you're like,
yes, although eventually the mainframe, eventually the mainframe will go away. I mean, it will go away eventually, mostly because there's nobody around to program it. Maybe we'll let the AGIs program it in the future. eventually these things go away, but it takes forever. I mean, as I say, I spent 10, 20 years of my career trying to replace AS400s. They didn't go away easily either. They stuck around for a really long time.
So I agree with what both of you are saying. There are two things that keep me up at night. Like if 10 years later, everything was just like a hype cycle. One is recent, which is actually what is AI gonna do? And what is I think every tool in the current modern data stack will have to fundamentally evolve. And I think if that doesn't happen, then the modern data stack looks very different. So I think that's one, but that's hopefully, we'll all innovate and that's a solvable problem. The second one that really keeps me up at night is all this technology innovation, it's all to reach this promised land, right? And the promised land is everybody makes data-driven decisions and organizations and enterprises and things like that. And I think we've still solved, this, we've actually made a ton of progress in the last 5 years on the stack, the data stack. I think the next evolution, my last Scholar talk was about this, was I think about the data culture stack, which is the people and the process and those side, that side of it, that I don't think we're spending enough time actually even figuring that stuff out. What does how does a data analyst grow? What does a career path look like? What is how do you interact with, how do you run a data team stand up? How does that even work? How do you work with your stakeholders? How do you, actually do a PRD on a data project? I think that stuff is really important to figure out. Otherwise, we'll have the technology, but we still won't reach promised land. And then, I think that will lead to I guess, trough of disillusionment and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think Atlan's doing a great job of helping with that, by the way. I think one of the attributes of Atlan that has always attracted me to the work that you and the team are doing is the fact that it really does involve people interacting with the data systems and how that interaction is taking place. And, really worked at Atlan, and I mean, I've given Tristan a hard time, but DBT has had such a gigantic impact on the industry and will continue to have a gigantic impact. And it really is about how people work together with these systems. I mean, I'm a big believer in machine learning and AGI and everything else, but it is about people and the way we influence these systems that matter.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I think it's time for final rounds here. I'll keep it pretty open-ended, right? If we were to look back and we're doing our great data debate of 2024, what is the one prediction that you're putting your money on? Prukalpa, I could start with you if you want.
AI will fundamentally change the way. I think I got it easy. I have consensus. You guys have a harder one.
We'll let the first person, you can change your answer after you hear everyone. No.
Well, I guess what I'm going to say is I think we're going to focus on models a lot. I think that the term that we should be thinking about a lot more is models, because we're moving to a world where everything is expressed in a model, whether it's the metadata structure, whether it's the SQL structure, whether it is the machine learning systems that are being built. These are all models that are going to impact business. And I think that's the high level concept that ties a lot of these things together. And I think we're going to put a lot more focus on modeling business and creating models that define where we want to go.
Can you double click a little bit on my engineering brain is just going towards okay, there's data models, machine learning models, decision models, business models. What does model mean?
A model is a representation of the real world in a digital computer system, essentially. It doesn't have to be a digital computer system. We first did modeling, years and years, decades ago on stone tablets and early paper and things like that. But today we're doing it digitally, and we're creating digital models, these so-called digital twins. And you see that in the physical world. Everything in the physical world is modeled today. I mean, when any part is created, it is built, it is designed in some sort of tool and then created to match that. It's built in a model. we are seeing models everywhere in terms of machine learning. They are all forms of models. What we haven't seen a lot of are these very explicitly defined models that take a ton of human knowledge and information and put them in one database. And that's where I think knowledge graphs will emerge in the next couple of years as a repository for explicit models. You have implicit models that we see everywhere. We implicitly model when we send an Atlan message or a Slack message or whatever we do. That's part of implicit modeling that needs to get formalized. And I think knowledge graphs will help to do that. And clearly, machine learning models, we're seeing it everywhere. Models are going to eat software.
When you say, I think I know what you're talking about, Bob. When you say more explicit models, do you mean like a model of like, does somebody get approved for this financial product or something like that?
Process,
right?
That process needs to get
complex.
modeled. Right, that expense report's a really interesting example because that's a process that needs to get explicitly modeled. There's a judgment decision that gets made there in an expense report approval. Was this particular expense valid or not? I think we'll be seeing machine learning take over a lot of that, which is today done by people. It's a job that I don't think anyone particularly likes. Looking through expense reports and approving them. And I think those will get automated in the future, and it will be models, both explicit that define the process and learned models that understand behavior that will combine together.
I'm excited about the comprehensive model of GAAP accounting. Let's not have anybody employed to do.
Can you
GAAP
imagine?
Anymore.
You really bring a big point out, which is government regulations, laws and government regulations can also be modeled. And I think that doing so will generate immense value to the world. I mean, we've never been able to do that before, but now we have, with these generative AI systems, we can translate English legalese is what it really is, the garbage that lawyers write, and translate that into a form of English that's understood and that has a limited grammar and is generally understood. And then we can actually model that in a system to understand and test and validate where the holes are in that. It's we have a tremendous opportunity to look at everything around our world as a model and improve the quality of it as a result.
My prediction is really boring. I know we're out of time. I think that there's a lot of vendors in the modern data stack. I think that we are, all of us, going to be in a year where we're focused on back to basics. Like over the past, I wrote this blog post in 2020 where I was predicting a Cambrian explosion of new. What I didn't anticipate was that I was going to get an assist from the Federal Reserve and making the cost of capital basically zero. And so there's going to be like 1 million startups formed. And so I think we did see that happen. And I think that there's going to be a lot of vendors that, we're all very aware of that are going to be focused on doing what we do and doing it really, really well.
I agree with that too.
Awesome. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you all for giving us the time to come and participate in this debate. I'm sure there'll be a ton of questions, and we'll try to follow up on social and see what's going on in the chat. But Bob, Prukalpa, Tristan, just thanks again. And we'll take a minute, and we're going to transition over into panel number 2 for the second half of this great data debate. So bear with us for 1 minute.
Take care.
Oh, this was fun.
I will kick things off. Thank you for everyone who was here for part 1. I'm super excited to finish the second half of our day. Today, we're joined by 3 more awesome people in the data world. Joining us, I guess we'll go through some quick intros. Again, it's probably a panel that doesn't need intros, but happy to do my best again. Representing the analytics world, we'll go from left to right here. Active blogger, one of the only people I've seen recreate the YouTube show Hot Ones live at a company event at DBT Coalesce. Probably one of the coolest things I've seen. Please welcome co-founder of Mode, Ben Stansel. Thanks for joining us. Next, when there's a need in a market and a category doesn't really exist yet, I think you just go out and create it yourself. So representing data observability, please welcome the co-founder and CEO of Monte Carlo, Bar Moses. And last but not least, we have, with over 2 decades of data and analytics experience, former Gartner VP, author of the book Infonomics, and most recently Data Juice. Please welcome Innovation Fellow from West Monroe, Mr. Doug Laney. Thanks, everyone. Super excited for you all to be here. Just like if you saw the first session, we were doing this rapid fire kind of break the ice type topics. So, it's very simple. We're going to do an either or session, right? So again, no time to explain your choice. I'm just going to throw a topic. You have to commit to it, stick with it for now, and you'll get a chance to explain later. I'll give you the this or that. We'll go number 1 or number 2. It'll be very, very simple. Sound fair? All right, let's do it. First one, either or, related to organization models in data and analytics. First, either or, right? Just give it 1 or 2. For organization models, centralized or decentralized. 1 for centralized, 2 for decentralized. We're going decentralized from Ben. All right.
I'm going for both here.
What's that?
I'm going for the cop-out answer and saying both, but I just want to say, in the future, ChatGPT is just going to respond instead of us. So I think that's where we're headed. So
fair enough. I see a lot of 1.5s in the chat too. So it's Doug, are you committing to a 1 or 2 here, a centralized or decentralized? Thank you. Mute here. Awesome. So we got 2 from Doug. We got the decentralized. Okay. We'll get a chance to dive deeper into these and explain yourself. I know there's really we probably can't give a 1 or a 2 answer. It's definitely a mixture of both, probably. Next one, this session, we want to talk a lot about data teams and ROI and value. So we'll go true or false, 1 for true, 2 false. Can we even measure the ROI of data teams? No, we got a thumbs down from Ben. Thumbs up from Bar. All right, Doug, the icebreaker or the tiebreaker here. We're going thumbs up. Yes, I would hope you would say yes, given the Infonomics book there. Last one, last rapid fire, and we can actually get into some good discussion. What do you think is the bigger problem our industry faces right now? Is it DataStack or is it data teams? We'll go 1 for DataStack, 2 for data teams. Biggest challenge, maybe not biggest problem. Okay.
To me, this one's complicated. The problem is actually teams, but we're not going to make teams better. So the only way to solve it is the stack.
Okay.
There's no clean answer there.
There's a lot to unpack there. I feel like that was a passionate answer. All right. Doug, any tiebreaker there? Is it teams or is it stack?
I know I'm from Chicago, but do you really want me to vote twice?
What's that?
I voted already.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you're in the chat. There's hundreds and hundreds of people in the chat, so it's hard to keep up. But okay, 2. All right. Well, we have some preliminary takes. I think it's good. We have something to work with here. We'll get into some longer answers now. Keep it super open-ended for the first one and just kind of see where this goes. But what changes in the future of data teams, right? We're in 2023, new year ahead of us. Okay to push further, maybe in the next even 2 to 5 years. But what changes in data teams? We've already seen roles that didn't exist 2 years ago exist, or 5 years ago start to exist. So maybe just let's get some open-ended responses on how do we see this changing in the data and analytics world. Bar, we can start with you. I see you're in my top left in the Brady Bunch here. So
sure, happy to. First of all, excited for this debate. I don't think I was actually on a panel with Doug and Ben, so this is fun. So I think, when I think about what's changed in the last few years and using that to inform what I think will change in the next few years, for the record, if I actually knew, I would probably be in a different profession. So I don't profess to try to forecast what will happen. But I think the big push or the big change that happened in the last few years was that it's pretty obvious, but like data teams became way more important in organizations. Actually, I think roles became way more clear. There's more of them, but there's more definition of the work and what actually needs to get done. And there's a lot more investment in data teams, which is awesome. Even I think in this market, we still see data teams hiring a ton, investing a ton, and leveraging data to actually improve decision-making, building way more data products than we've ever seen before. So I think that's what we've seen change, and using that to inform where I think we're going. I think it's sort of the time, it's like money time for data teams now. They actually have to prove that kind of all the investment that we've made is now the time for us to actually use data. And I think in order to do that, we have to get closer to the business. So, I think one of the things that I'm seeing a lot is kind of this like breaking points or friction between data teams and business. And this has to do with kind of proving ROI, but not only just how does it, what are we doing day to day that actually impacts the business using data? So I'm excited for data teams to do a lot more of that in the next few years.
Awesome. I agree. Ben?
So I would disagree that data teams have become really important in the last few years. We've spent a lot of money on them. I don't know if they're important yet. Like, I think that we have convinced ourselves that we do a bunch of important stuff, and we've told all these grand stories about how data teams are really important and companies can't survive without data and all that sort of stuff. Is that true? Like, I think that's sort of again, it's a narrative that we have, but I actually don't know that that's actually borne out. And so to me, like, the thing that changes is that has to become more real or it doesn't work. Like the way that we have done this point, I think this is probably because of some of the stuff that Bar alluded to about like not being close to the business and things like that. There's a little bit of an idea of like a data team can show up and just add value, and like we can go hire a bunch of people and buy a bunch of tools, and all of a sudden there will be some magic that's unlocked, and like it ain't happening. And so I think that like what happens now is it becomes like, all right, we got to actually sort of prove that. Some companies I think will, some won't. And so I think there will actually be like we got to find a new way, and it's not going to be exactly right for everybody. Like this is not like, there's not a one size fits all for how data teams work. And so I think there will be some companies that are like, you know what, actually, this just isn't worth the time for us. Like this isn't the thing that is worth some big investment.
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Ben on there isn't a one size fits all, and with Bar on the need for emerging roles, but maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing, and it isn't teams, but rather functions and capabilities. So how an organization actually organizes around that is going to be dependent upon their own culture and the different kinds of initiatives that they have underway. So I think planning for certain kinds of emerging roles, like what we've already seen, data ops and data science, but data curation is one. Most companies have an entire department dedicated to procuring office supplies, but not a single person dedicated to procuring data supplies, particularly external data supplies. So these are roles I think we need to focus on if we're talking about measuring ROI and the value of data-related initiatives. Then we probably ought to have someone with some kind of economic bent focusing on data and analytics. We're going to need folks to manage data and digital products, data and digital product managers. We need AI architects and data and digital ethicists as we're thinking about pushing the envelope about how we're going to be doing things with data and what we're going to be doing with data and digital capabilities. As we've seen here in the last several weeks, people are starting to pop up with roles or job descriptions for prompt engineers to help these large language model AI capabilities deliver more value for organizations, storytellers as well. So how this all gets organized within an enterprise will be really up to their culture and their objectives. But I don't see it as being something that is entirely centralized. I don't think that's I just don't think that's very tenable.
I have a question on that actually, Doug. But so all that makes sense if you sort of presuppose that all of this is worth a whole lot of money in the first place. Like hiring all of these different people, all these different roles, sort of, again, it makes sense if it's like, hey, this is actually something that worth a ton of money to invest in across the board. Have we actually proven that to you? Like, do you think that is sort of a done deal?
No, not a done deal. Most organizations are not in a very good position at all, or have been to value their data function, maybe their analytics function, but certainly not the foundational stuff that they do. We at West Monroe have been working with a number of large organizations to quantify the value of their data products, their data functions, and really to help them not only build data literacy, but manage those functions and manage those data and data products as more of an actual product, take a real product approach to that. So until you're, there's the old adage, you can't manage what you're not measuring. And until organizations are really measuring the value and cost, the numerator and denominator of their data functions, then they're going to be in a poor position to be able to manage them well.
I don't want to like monopolize this, but my last question would be like, do you think it's inevitable that we get there where all these companies can do that?
We get there big time when the accountants come around to recognizing data as an actual corporate asset. Right now, due to antiquated and arcane accounting practices, data is not considered a balance sheet asset, even though it clearly meets the criteria of one. I won't get into the accounting definition, but it clearly meets the definition of an asset. And only when the accountants kind of come around to that will probably the rest of the world be compelled to treat data as an asset. And then we as data professionals will be more, let's say, revered in our organizations.
So I have a question based on that. Or Bar, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, just curious, kind of reflecting on what Ben said earlier. How do you like the day when data teams become more important? How would you measure that? How do you think of the importance of data teams, if at all? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's a real reasonable question, but I think it's like part of it is how hard it is for us to justify what we do. Like there feels like a sort of lot of circular justification for what we do. There's a lot of like, how do we measure the ROI? Well, you can't really do it. We do it in these sort of soft ways. Like you go to a sales team, it's like, how do you justify a sales team? That's a real short conversation. You go to a sales VP and say, hey, why are you here? They're like, I can answer that in 10 seconds, no problem. And I think until we get to a point where we can do that isn't a little bit like hand wavy about helping people make better decisions, but in what way we're not really sure, reporting, like there's stuff to me that's still a little bit soft in terms of what we do. It doesn't mean that that's not like a good answer at some point, but I think that there's like, it feels like we spend a lot of time defending what we're doing. And at some point you have to wonder, like, are we defending a bit of a lemon?
Makes sense. I feel like I run into this issue a lot when I talk to different companies where sometimes the data team is spending a lot of time trying to explain what data and analytics is to the business instead of flipping that and saying, how can the data and analytics team better understand, the business itself or the different functions? And I think that makes the conversation somewhat easier to then attribute value or attribute, here's the work that we have done that supports this type of function. Explaining it, how a data lake or a data mesh architecture works to someone in the business is probably somewhat of a, I don't want to say lost cause, but it doesn't get you where you need to be. It doesn't end the conversation like your example in the sales conversation. So,
yeah, and to like some of the kind of like it applies equally to brand and marketing. Absolutely, it does. And there'll be some companies that don't want to spend any money on brand and marketing. That's a reasonable decision that some companies make. So I think some companies have very like strong proof points about how marketing works. Some don't use it. And so I think that's actually a reasonable comparison.
Yeah. I was just your question is sparking a lot of ideas. I mean, there's even a lot of digital native companies their entire business is built off of data, yet they don't have probably what we would have traditionally thought of data and analytics, which is like basic enterprise reporting or just reporting of their own work, right? Their business is data products, but they lack some type of understanding of their own operations from a business standpoint. So it's different starting.
Which I think is actually a part where like data teams have hurt themselves a little bit by like reporting is really valuable, but there is a tendency of data teams to be like reluctant to do it or say like, we do something that's sort of a higher order than that. That's like the base of the pyramid. Let us do this more valuable stuff. And it kind of pushes us to think like we're doing more than reporting when there's a ton of value in reporting. And if we just sold the value of reporting, I think these conversations are actually easier.
Okay. So I mean, a lot of my questions were along this type of topic. ROI value. There's a lot of focus on data ops. We're focusing a lot on efficiency. I constantly hear like time to value, time to insight. What are metrics that we can use, if any, just based on this conversation, to demonstrate value? What are examples that maybe you have seen in customers who are doing a really good job at either telling the story or explicitly connecting their work to value? Just kind of start there. Very light topic, very easy to answer, right? Doug, you can start if you want.
Sorry, I'm debating online with somebody. Ask your question again. I'm having more fun in the chat right now.
I was saying that with such an emphasis on data ops and efficiency, there's a lot of focus on making data teams better. What are actual metrics that we can use to demonstrate value? Or do you have examples of teams or customers that have done a really good job at either telling the story or actually have an explicit framework of saying, like, here's how we provide value, or here's how we have improved, whether it's efficiency metrics, what have you?
Sure. Well, Ricky on the chat was mentioning that, of course, we need to tie the value to the output and, or the analytics. But I think there's value that can be measured in the foundational activities as well. For example, we found in some research that organizations that simply measure data quality are one-fifth as likely to have data quality issues that impact the top and bottom line. So there's a metric right there. And they're 5 times more likely to be generating significant benefits from their data. So kind of correlating things that are happening at a foundational level can be, those dots can be connected to actual business metrics. It's difficult to do, but it's not impossible.
So my view is Bar's opening kind of point was right, which is basically it's measured through the teams that you work with, that like sort of customer NPS is in some ways, to me, the best measure that I've seen, where it's essentially like if you go to your marketing team and saying, hey, we're getting rid of the data team, how upset would you be? And they're like, absolutely not, we cannot function without it. That's as kind of good as you can really do. There's a lot of reasons why that's metrics as a like actual metric, I think is tough. The thing I kind of would want to see is essentially how much money is that team willing to spend on the data like assets themselves. Like if the marketing team had to take from their budget to say, hey, we want to fund data work, will they actually do it? Like when push comes to shove, is it worth money to those folks? Which is part of the reason I think like the decentralized model is kind of where we'll head, is that's the only way to actually determine like, is this actually worth the budget that the teams that are actually using it are the ones funding it? And so then the choice becomes like sort of a economically rational one for those teams where they actually see the value, and you can kind of like trust your leadership to say, yeah, you probably make good decisions about where to spend money, rather than sort of a IT team deciding if data is worth it and kind of like a general level and sort of hand waving past what that means.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say, to build on that, I mostly see data teams struggling with this. There's kind of different levels of sophistication in terms of actually like measuring and reporting. But I think across the board, we are seeing data teams actually try to do it, which is pretty cool. Let's see where we are in a year from now. I think there's like maybe 2 or 3 kind of sets of things that folks measure. The first is actually like user metrics. So like literally how many daily or monthly active users are there for like, your BI tool, your experimentation tools, whatever it is, how easy it is to use, kind of to Ben's question, like what's your NPS for it? How happy are you with it? And then also how much do you trust it? Like, is it actually accurate? Is it correct? I think part of that can actually broken into this sense or idea of like maturity of that system. So is it scalable? Can you actually have, that solution be used by, tens of thousands of users or more? Is there documentation around it? Is it self-serve? Can you actually have someone just pick it up, or do you need to have it go through, full training or sort of additional teams to enable other teams to use it? And then I think for folks who get kind of past those first 2, there's kind of the third level, which is really getting into impact, which obviously gets a lot harder, especially around attribution. But by the way, marketing teams have similar problems of attribution as well. So one thing that you could try to look at is like percentage lift, for example, in a specific conversion number that the data team has helped with. Is it exactly 1-to-1? Probably not. Is it exactly like specific? No, I don't think so. And it's really hard to argue that it is. But that's definitely kind of where, where I see folks go. Just to call it a specific team, the Red Ventures team, for example, they have pretty sophisticated measures in place, both for SLAs, but also actually attributing the work that they do to help contribute the impact. Many other teams actually measure a lot of those metrics that I discussed in kind of item 1 and item 2. So see that across the board for sure. And I expect more and more folks will go into kind of the next level and try to actually attribute their impact to the business impact.
Gotcha. There's I think 2 interesting subtopics in Barb, what both you and Ben said, which is there's kind of like an onus on the data leader now to go well beyond the data team to number 1, put their team in a position where they're doing things that are valuable for the business, and also that storytelling element of kind of selling it or being able to communicate beyond their own efficiency metrics, right? Like the concept of having a net promoter score for your data products, or the concept of connecting it to a lift percentage. Like that's something that I think you have to get out of your, engineering and architectural type hat and get more into your, put on your business hat a little bit there to tell that. So I think maybe that's not something new, but I think something that's definitely important, especially going into 2023. And you can tell me I'm crazy too.
You should do a contest for the best example across the industry and see what we come up with for the best impact on a company that the data team has done.
Done. I will write it down. Cool. So let's probably more of a I don't know if it's an existential type question, but it seems like, with all the technologies out there, things are getting so much easier for data teams. Ben, you were saying we just need to make it so easy for them that, they don't need to worry about the team problems. Like, why don't we have it figured out yet? Relative to 5 to 10 years ago, things are definitely easier, but I think fundamentally we still have similar patterns of data and analytics, like the pipelines and how they operate. So
I think there's 2 possibilities to that. I talked about this a little bit before, and I was just talking about someone this today of there's this bit of a paradox to me where it's 10 years ago, we have way better technology. Data teams aren't that much more impactful today. We are way better at the tech, but the actual delivery of the things we're trying to do isn't that big. And so why have we not taken an equally big jump? I think there's probably a couple reasons. One reason possibly is that this stuff is hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to actually do stuff that is impactful for the business. And so having a bunch of tools that help you do it doesn't make us better. And I actually don't think we're going to get any better. This is what I was saying at the question at the beginning. I don't think actually the idea of we're all just going to up level and become amazing analysts is no, not really. The tools have just got to get better to help us do it, because we're not going to become better human beings. Mm-hmm. And so I think one thing is that the tools have to continue to get better to cover our own deficiencies. The other possibility is the more existential one, which is we built a bunch of really nice tools. It's the analogy I would use is we built a bunch of really nice oil rigs because some really rich companies found oil in their companies. And we said, we're going to install an oil rig. And we're there's no oil under our companies. So we're just not going to find that value because it's not really there to be unlocked in the first place. But that's this more cynical take. The other take to me is it's just a hard job, and we got to actually make it way easier. And we've made parts of it easier, but not sort of the end delivery of it easy enough to make it that accessible.
Ben, that's a good point. Let me throw out a hypothesis. Back when I first defined the 3 V's of big data, the volume, velocity, and variety, very quickly we realized that it was the variety issue that was vexing organizations more so than the volume and velocity. We've developed tools to handle volume and velocity. We brought cloud that can handle huge volumes of data and speed of data. We've increased network performance and so forth, but we've never really cracked the variety issue from a tools perspective. And that's really the thing that is most difficult to deal with. How are we architecting the integration of data, or the movement of data, or the availability of data? It still very much is a manual architectural endeavor that we really haven't developed significant tools for, certainly not ones that have kept up with the broadening variety of data that we have to deal with. So just throwing that out there as a hypothesis. It'd be interesting to test that somehow.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, because it's that's the part to be where it makes the leap from data team to everybody else. And that stuff is really hard, and having a really easy ETL tool, great, that helps, but that doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't you could make it really easy for me to get a bunch of data about various medical experiments. I'm not going to cure cancer. Like the data is not the problem. And I think that like the same thing sort of applies here to a much lesser degree. We're not trying to cure cancer, but still hard.
What questions aren't, I feel like a lot of times consumers drive the industry, right? Like there's a need for something and then products come in to fill that need, right? Are we just like, we don't know what we don't know as customers. And so we're not asking for the right thing. Like we're asking for incremental efficiencies in a process that already exists instead of completely reinventing the process itself. Like, is that a piece of the issue, or like, maybe I'll rephrase it to, 5 years from now, will the DataStack look exactly how it is today, just better, faster, and stronger? Or will it be completely different than what we think of right now?
Well, I think there's a couple of things happening. One is there's just honestly like a lot of problems to solve, I think, in this space. And I think, it's sort of natural that there will be lots of different approaches to try to solve them. Will we consolidate on the best one? I hope so. But I think that's kind of a little bit of the divergence that you see. So even if you listen to customers or listen to data teams, like oftentimes, there might be conflicting priorities or conflicting needs for the business and conflicting needs for the teams as well. And you still have to choose one and make a bet and go for it. So I think that's actually natural. And I think if you look at the modern data stack, whatever that may be, whatever buzzword we choose to describe what we're doing, I hope it'll look way better in a few years from now. But I think that's because the people working on it are like more focused on solving real problems versus trying to create more and more problems for ourselves. But I do see data teams, doing, my opinion is that data teams are actually working on things that are more valuable today versus like 5 to 10 years ago. And I think that's partly enabled by better solutions to help them do that. We have a long way to go. There's a lot of stuff that we have to figure out, but that's my take.
Ben, I can see you thinking.
I'm gonna risk really stepping in something I have no idea how it actually works here.
We got your back.
We'll see. So
Who's
I think that, yeah. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. Star schemas. So star schemas are a thing that have been around for a while. It's basically like an architectural paradigm that makes sense in a world that looks like what data looked like 20 years ago. As Doug alluded to, like there's a ton more variety of data now. Sort of the scope of like the data that you have to model has gotten massively bigger compared to what it was. And yet the default for how most organizations think about organizing their data in their warehouse is a star schema, or at least something that is like broadly inspired by a star schema. And I think there's something there that like, you kind of do it because it's this incremental thing. And okay, we know this worked before, let's keep kind of piling on. But at some point you kind of have to step back and be like, does this make any sense in this world anymore? Like, can we possibly build things that look like star schemas on top of the 5,000 DBT models that Tristan referenced?
Especially when 80% of the data is unstructured and doesn't fit into a transactional star kind of format.
Exactly. But it's like the thing that we had, so we held on to it a little bit. And I think there may be, that stuff may start to crack. And one of those things that may crack is like the interaction model between data teams and their business stakeholders, where it has historically been kind of an IT-oriented, help desky kind of thing. Ask questions, we give you answers, we sit alongside you, like that sort of stuff. Like maybe that just, like maybe we have so fundamentally changed the landscape of what this is, that model needs to crack a lot more than like these little fidgets that we've had around the edges to this point so far. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think like we have a lot of things that made sense 20 years ago when we were basically IT and BI teams. But when we changed that paradigm so dramatically, we might want to change those pieces as well.
Plus one to that. I hate to agree with Ben, but I agree with Ben.
Fair enough. All right.
Somebody posted in the chat there, Gordon mentioned that's where Bob was going with his relational knowledge graphs in the last session. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if it's reassuring or scary that all 6 of you sort of agree that there's this cool opportunity to connect systems that don't necessarily talk to each other today. And part of that is like SQL oriented systems versus graph oriented versus maybe like NoSQL, but just one kind of place to access all of these different file formats and table formats and structures. Seems like something that's really interesting, or something that potentially is missing in the modern data stack over the next few years. So I definitely hear a lot more about graph powering these more complex relationships. So very cool. I know we have a little less than 10 minutes now, so I think I've just two more questions that I wanted to throw out there. Talked a lot about value. What are, I'd say, in your day-to-day, it's kind of interesting. I think everyone has a slightly different perspective based on where we're coming from. But what are, three metrics that you would use to measure and communicate value right now? I think you gave a lot of examples before, but maybe just kind of reiterate, here's the three that you need to focus on. 2023 is going to be a harder year in the economic conditions to, not only, I don't want to say justify data teams, but, really show where data teams are shining. So what are those three? I can maybe seed, I don't want to lead the witness, but, I think here's how data teams can get faster and more cost efficient, metrics around business value, and potentially metrics around just impact to the organization itself. But asking some of the chat, more of the NPS type stuff that Bar mentioned. So
yeah, my answer would be like NPS, the quantified reaction on people's faces when you tell them they no longer have someone on the data team supporting them, to see how upset they are. And then I think this is a little bit of a political number, but what Bar said about like adoption of the things that you're building, I don't necessarily know that means you're delivering value, but if you are like advocating for your data team, you can often like create numbers that show a good bit of adoption about, hey, look, people are relying on these dashboards. Do they rely on these dashboards to make good decisions? I don't know. But if I'm advocating for the data team, I'm sure going to point to that number.
Okay.
Yeah, if I had to pick three, one would be connecting data quality to business process performance. So whatever data quality or aggregate of data quality metrics you want, some aggregate of accuracy, completeness, integrity, timeliness, whatever. And then connecting those to the KPIs for the business processes where that data is used. That would be probably a start. The second would be looking at the denominator side of data's value proposition. What is the cost to manage, store, secure, collect data, generate data, and then the numerator side, which is for any given data asset, what is its contribution to a revenue stream, or maybe also roll in its market value into that as well. So
I'll round it out. I would say, the incremental dollar value that your data team is driving. I think that should be something that teams aspire to if they can't do it already. And as a leading indicator to that, the usage metrics, to the extent possible. Again, nothing's perfect, but I would start with that. And then I do think maturity metrics, like what Doug mentioned around security, scalability. I'm obviously biased, but reliability and trustworthy of the data, I think, are super important. Otherwise, it's just really hard to use the data if you can't actually trust it.
now usage, I'm not really keen on usage. You're probably talking about that as some sort of proxy for benefits, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly. So the idea, if you're rolling out, the easiest idea is if you're rolling out a BI solution or whatnot, and there's only one person using it, is that a lot or a little? I don't know. It's a very simplistic way to look at it, but maybe a starting point.
yeah, but if that one person is using it to maintain minimum inventory levels that are 20% below, historical trends, that could be really valuable.
Totally agree. That's
Yeah,
why I think
yeah.
tying to dollar value is the most important.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Yeah.
possible. Yeah.
And I also think we need to get away from thinking about people using data. Increasingly, it's applications and systems themselves that are the consumers of data. So we kind of need to get out of that box of thinking about people using data, because that's just not going to be the case going forward.
So then does that extension of usage become, well, if you're using your CRM system, the amount of users in the CRM are now a proxy for the value that the data and analytics team brings if I'm pumping data back into that system, or if I'm monitoring data or observing data in that system? Is that now, but come back to Ben's answer of you asked the sales team, well, now you have a very short answer because
Yeah,
they're using the data that worked on?
I would try to avoid tying it to people, tie it to process value, not the number of people using it.
Fair, makes sense.
Yep.
All right, so last question, same as the first panel. You know, if we look back in 2024, we're doing the same debate next year. What's the one prediction that you'd put your money on that you could come next year and say, yeah, I got that 100% right, or you know, I'm willing to bet that's yeah, right, 100%. Or you know, just what are you willing to put your money on that one trend or that one thing throughout 2023? Doug, we'll start with you, and then we'll go.
People talk about data being the new oil, and maybe you've heard me talk about data has unique characteristics that make it much more valuable than oil. But we're all watching what's happening right now with the large language models and generative AI like ChatGPT. And while today those models are leaning on the corpus of the internet as a whole, increasingly they'll be diving into an organization's own data. So the value that those models and systems can provide will be as good as the data your organization has. And so I think it's going to raise the importance of collecting and managing and cleansing and making your data available to those models. It's going to make data that much more important to an organization.
We'll go in my Brady Bunch order. It's I guess this way: Ben and then Bar.
I like that answer actually. I would say like the thing, if I had to like bet on it, my like a boring answer would be basically the same as what Tristan's was from before of there's going to be like a real kind of push around, all right, we're sort of aren't in this expansive phase anymore where everybody's trying to do tons of different things, but like, hey, we got a tighter economic climate to kind of do things in ways that we prove are really valuable. If I had to like take a flyer on something and put all my money on Braves to win the World Series next year kind of thing, I would probably say something along the lines of like, there will be some movement away from the kind of all-in investment on data-driven companies win, that some people will start to have like a little bit of a counterculture take to that, where it's like Elon Musk came in and fired 80% of Twitter and it seems to be doing okay. Like we just need people like that who are going to make decisions on their gut, who aren't going to spend a bunch of money on data tools, who aren't going to sort of get caught up in like the science, and instead will just be like executives. And I can see that being, especially in like a place where you're paying a lot more attention to costs, there being some people who like push that particular like way of running a business.
Yeah. Bar, bring us home.
Yeah, I think we're all circling around maybe kind of a similar trend here. Like I think data is going to become a lot more important. We're going to see, I do think, while we are seeing kind of, tighter economic times, data is becoming, more and more front and center. I think we're saying, organizations that have 100x more data products, that's not uncommon. There's a lot more roles. We didn't talk about this, but like data product managers, data reliability engineers, like all those additional jobs. I think when we talk about generative AI, there's a lot of potential and a lot of promise, but I don't think it's going to replace data teams anytime soon. And I think there's a lot more work that we have to do to get even close to that. So I'm really excited for where we go with data. I think there's also going to be, a time where financial ops and rev ops will work closer with data teams to kind of guide where the future is for folks, both in terms of optimizing their own cost of infra and resources, but also optimizing the business cost. I think we'll see more of that. Excited for it.
Awesome. Well, we are right on time. Thank you for the takes, the opinions, the thoughts, and your thoughtful answers there. I think rarely do we get 6 people like this under one roof in an hour and a half to take on the whole data and analytics world in 2023. So just thank you to the panelists and thank you for everyone who was able to attend, and really looking forward to this year. I think it's going to be really exciting for our world, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Joe.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.